Okay, before I start to clarify, I am not Trevor. My voice is not weird. It's just my natural voice. My name is Billy. I'm the editor, and sometimes I take over. You got that? Good. Let's not have any weird questions now. Alright, now let's go on to the video. Alright, hear me out. The movies Freddy's Dead, Final Nightmare, and Shrek have nothing in common. Yeah, they're completely separate entities with no use for comparison. So why did I even bring this up? Because they have some pretty big memes, for better or worse, from their respective franchises, but there's one crucial aspect that they share beyond meme status. The producer, Aaron Warner. Yes, the man who won the first Academy Award for Best Animated Feature, and the voice of this guy, was a producer on the final installment of Nightmare on Elm Street. One of the crazier film crew connections I've made, this was a fact that blew my mind when uncovering this. Being a massive fan of the Shrek films, as well as an avid horror lover with a particular interest in the Elm Street movies, this information has stuck with me ever since. Not just for the insanity of it, but for how this final installment of an A-list horror franchise could bring us one of the most influential animated films of the 21st century. I'll be discussing how A Nightmare on Elm Street gave us Shrek. Let's start at the very beginning. Aaron Warner was fresh out of UCLA Film School when he was involved with his first major film production. He was a production assistant for the 1984 comedy drama titled Choose Me, which was written and directed by Alan Rudolph. Afterwards, he got a position at Empire Pictures, a small distribution company specializing in low-budget features, where he worked on the sci-fi film Trancers and the cult classic Ghoulies, which I couldn't finish myself. Following this, Warner moved to Film Finances and Completion Bond Company, where he worked on multiple films for various studios. The most notable projects being John Waters' 1988 film Hairspray, where he was a production supervisor. By the early 90s, he had a total of 50 films in his resume, most of which being uncredited. In fact, the only reason why we know his involvement with some of these films is because of the Shrek DVD menu. Thank you very much. Then, the new decade of the 1990s arrived. After working on multiple projects, he finally got an opportunity to be a legitimate producer. This wasn't just any movie, however. It was the final installment of the New Line Cinema franchise, A Nightmare on Elm Street. Now, I don't think this series needs an introduction. In the 1980s, this was a f***ing icon. Freddy Krueger himself has also become one of the most recognizable horror characters of all time. Even to this day, the franchise is still talked about, and around Halloween time, all kinds of merchandise is sold with the character. Around 1990, however, New Line was focusing on other franchises such as Critters and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and Robert Shea, the producer of all the Elm Street movies, felt it was the right time to hang the bladed glove and striped sweater for good. For this installment, fellow producer of Nightmare on Elm Street 4, H.L, was promoted to director for the final installment, and in charge of producing alongside Shea in this was none other than Aaron Warner, who had done enough films to warrant a position as tall as a full-on producer. And unfortunately, that's kind of all that can be said. No interviews, no mention of the film years later, nothing. While the director has been interviewed about the film during its release and even spoke about her views on the final product in the Never Sleep Again documentary, the only justifications of Aaron Warner's involvement are the opening credits and the Shrek DVD special features, like I said earlier. Although, considering the legacy that this film has, even to the point that Wes Craven himself, the series creator, couldn't even finish this one due to how bad it was, I wouldn't be surprised if Warner also felt disappointed in the final result. This is further proven by how producer Robert Shea apologized to the Elm Street fans for how poorly it was received. And while it seemed like Robert Englund, Freddy Krueger's performer, had a ton of fun in the film, confessed in his book, Hollywood Monster, that he felt it was the weakest sequel out of the entire lot. Finally, the director, H.L, even admitted that her and the writing team went way overboard on the humorous tone. See, while the previous 5 films had at least a trace of fear and darkness, this one is far more silly and exists to make you laugh, whether on purpose or by accident. And as for fans of the movies, well, yeah, this is pretty awful. I cannot justify this one in particular, and unless, you just want to have a fun time and make fun of it, especially with scenes like this.
Hey, you forgot the power glove!
Yeah. Oh boy, that was fun. Despite the negative critical reception, Freddy's Dead was a financial hit, and now with a major producing gig under his belt, Warner became the vice president of production at 20th Century Fox. Here he oversaw the productions of movies like Independence Day, the 1996 adaptation of The Crucible, Alien Resurrection, and even the then #1 blockbuster of all time, Titanic. Ironically enough, though, he also oversaw the production of True Lies, which Andrew Adamson, the director of Shrek, worked the visual effects for, but I'm getting ahead of myself on that. During his time there, however, he still worked closely with H.L on her films, Ghost in the Machine and Tank Girl, acting as line producer and executive producer respectively. After his time at Fox, he joined PDI DreamWorks to return to the producer scene with the controversial 1998 animated feature Ants. It was also during this production that Warner joined another animated film at the studio, a troubled production known as Shrek. And, well, I mean, you pretty much know the story from here, especially if you've known the story of the original Shrek film, its turbulent production, the original version, as well as all the funny production stories that you can go find yourself in books like From Swamp to Screen and other interviews with the crew members and other art books and online interviews and production notes in the DVD menus. Although I must say, just from looking at the story alone, it is rather inspiring to see just how far someone can go to win the first Academy Award for a niche art after, well, let's just say, one of the worst endings to a big major franchise you could possibly do. And, you know, it's just a funny story to tell, and, you know, we have a scheduled film, Media Memento, so, I mean, this helps too. Do you think this was interesting? Because I found it interesting, and I hope you do too. I'd like to thank the producers on Patreon, Reziel, Leaf Razor, Sophie Burgers, Tanner Kapishki, and Azarius. If you also want to have your name read out of nowhere in my stuff, then please consider donating to the Patreon. Link is in the description below. And, wonder what other weird connections filmmakers have. Oh, look, Chris Columbus!